And not only just for, I pulled the trigger a half cock and sure enough it snapped. So these were junk. And they carried these things from September until January when they were given Enfield rifles. They're British imports, very, very good. They're just as good as the Springfield is. But I guess the soldiers like the Springfield, they're American made and so forth. So they're off to the war, took 2 trains to carry them from Goshen down to New York City. On the way, somewhere around Chester, the train slowed down and a couple of soldiers jumped off. They already have had the military. Captain Leander Clark jumped off also and grabbed one of them and dragged him back onto the train. And when he put up a fuss, Captain Leander Clark bloodied his face, and then they handcuffed him to the seat. And then when they got to New York City, they handcuffed him to a tree in Park Barracks down there. And then he turned into a pretty good soldier. I won't tell you his last name because someone maybe related to this guy. They get there, they are stationed. Does anybody have this one to read? Go ahead.
We are advised that the 124th Colonel Ellis's regiment is encamped at Camp Ellis on the Virginia side of the river, directly opposite Georgetown. The regiment is attached to General Pratt's brigade, General Whipple's division, and General
Heinzelman.
for a army.
Yes.
Captain Murray of Company B offers $10 reward each for the apprehension of 3 deserters from his company, named Albert A. Wood, Andrew J. Isbell, and John F. Brown.
This is Murray from, these are Goshen boys that are, it's the first opportunity they get, you know. And here is, their camp is at, here's Georgetown, I think is here. And their camp, I found it somewhere in here. And so this is how the people back home found out news of where the soldiers were appeared. There were some reporters that went along. Now these are 2 letters written by mates. We can't read the whole thing, but there's a couple things I want to draw your attention to. First of all, the date, September 26th and then 28th. I received your welcome letter yesterday, the next day after it was made. That postal service back then was terrific because of railroads. You could, you know, get a letter there in a day or 2. Now down here, he says, I like a soldier's life bully. And he talks about pitching a tent under the stars, and he's really loving military duty. Then he says, Lieutenant Wygant is not well. Camp life is too much for his slightly thrown together frame. He talks about if he don't get better, he'll go to Washington and go home. So this first lieutenant is already talking about, you know, this, I'm just not up for this. And then he writes, Old Bill stands it well. Well, he's Old Bill. He's telling, you know, his brother, I can do this. I feel confident I can do it. Okay? And he talks about the weather and so forth. And then he mentions here, Old Abe is a hoss. Good. Tell me how the late proclamation suits the folks back home. That's the Emancipation Proclamation. And they, you know, the soldiers would keep up on this type of thing. A couple of days later, he writes another letter. Lieutenant Wygant is sick. He's applied for leave, and you know, pretty soon, he says he has got that. I can't hysterics. He's trying to write hysterics. He said if I didn't spell it, I'm just trying to say he's discontented. Well, very quickly, Captain Murray signed the paper, and Wygant was you know, off to do other things. And so these are the type of things, when you read these letters from the letter collections, first of all, it'll give you a headache pretty quick. Their writing was good. It was a literate society, but you know, their language and the way they wrote were pretty interesting. Now, They go through September, October. The Battle of Antietam took place in September. Lee's army was retreating down the Shenandoah Valley. The Army of the Potomac was following them on the other side of the mountains. Okay, so they're coming down from way up here. And this took about all through October, and then the rainy season starts in Virginia. And before long, it's sleet in November. And after that, it's snow. And a lot of soldiers got sick on that march. Now, what they're trying to do, Lee's armies in the Shenandoah Valley, sooner or later, they're going to have to turn and try to get back so they can protect Richmond. Everybody figured they would go to Fredericksburg, which is exactly where they were going to be heading. And so General Hooker, who was the new commander of the army, wants to put the army, or excuse me, Burnside was the commander. He wanted to put them on the north side, bring up pontoon bridges and cross the Rappahannock River and have a battle there. Lee got there first, and it became a stalemate. Fredericksburg was a battle in December. Ambrose Burnside sent the troops across the river. They got massacred. Lee was dug in. It was a disaster. So he got fired. And now he's replaced by Fighting Joe Hooker, Joseph Hooker, a very interesting character. He's interesting in one respect because he could have ended the Civil War at the next battle that's coming up, which is Chancellorsville. It turns out Chancellorsville is called Lee's greatest victory. He decisively defeated this guy. Hooker crossed, I'll show you what he did. He crossed the river, got beat, crossed back again. And then they lick their wounds and come again. Hooker's plan was to go up the river with 3 corps of infantry, a lot of guys, cross over and get into the rear of Lee's army. He's going to send cavalry first. Huge amounts of Union cavalry rode towards Richmond. The Confederates just ignored it. They said, we have to deal with the army here. Okay. By this time, Heintzelman, that you mentioned, is gone, and he's replaced by Daniel Hooker, Daniel Sickles, a New York City politician, and kind of a ne'er-do-well character. We'll talk about him a little bit more in a minute. Hooker's plan for this battle, the upcoming battle of Chancellorsville, was the most dangerous plan ever conceived against the Confederates. That's what a Confederate officer wrote after the war. He said, the Union had the best chance to end the war at Chancellorsville, or end the war early. That includes all the battles that General Grant fought. So the plan was great. And Hooker said, I'm going to get in behind him and get on his flank. We're going to attack him from the front, and he has 2 choices. He can either counterattack and we'll dig in and we'll beat him, or he must ingloriously flee. Okay, so Hooker is giving General Lee 2 choices. Well, General Lee come up with a 3rd choice, and also a 4th choice. And without too much talking about it, the Battle of Chancellorsville was, this shows the movement of it. But what I want to show you is that the 124th New York, here's Sickles, they're right in the middle. Okay? They're right where the action is. And they fought on Saturday and Sunday and lost a tremendous number of men. In fact, let's go down to and there's Hooker. He's got his army on this side, and the battle by the May 3rd, which was a Sunday, the battle was lost, and Hooker took his men back across. The next battle they were in was a month later. Was at Brandy Station, the biggest cavalry battle of the Civil War. They went along as infantry support. General Hooker wanted to know, what is Lee up to on the upper Rappahannock River? He had information given to him that he thought General Lee may launch another invasion like he did with Antietam. And so he sent the cavalry, the 124th New York and the 86th New York were both chosen as infantry support. It was a great honor, and they knew it. You know, they wanted dependable regiments because cavalry battles are very fluid. You know, the horsemen are riding around, it's to and fro. They need a place to fall back behind, regroup, and go out again. Now, the Confederates declared Brandy Station a big victory. You know, the Yankees came, we kicked them out. But this, it wasn't, you know, General Pleasanton and the other generals, they weren't there to fight a battle. They were there to gather information. And the information they gathered is, yes, there's infantry here, Confederate infantry, lots of them. They're moving into the battle and they're heading north. And I'll show you again here, 124th New York is right here. Okay, they're in a belt of woods. These cavalry, this Confederate cavalry are going to attack the Union. The Union cavalry is already fighting guys in front of them. These guys are going to come across and hit them in the flank. The 124th New York in the woods, as these hundreds and hundreds of cavalrymen, the ground shook, came charging across their front. They fired volley after volley into them, and the Confederate attack was broken up. So again, in 2 battles in a row, they're right, you know, where the action is the toughest. Okay. Now about this badge, at Brandy Station, they cross back over, and then General Hooker puts his army in motion to go after General Lee. In the meantime, the casualties at Chancellorsville were so heavy that the division that they belonged to, the 124th belonged to, the 3rd Division of the 3rd Corps, was dissolved. And regiments were sprinkled into the 1st and 2nd Division. The insignia of the 1st Division is this red diamond. There's General Kearney, who invented it. He supposedly came across a couple of officers lounging around and went up to them and started yelling at them. And you know, he had a wonderful mastery of profanity. This guy was a rich guy. He didn't go to West Point. He lost his arm, I think, in the Mexican War. He rode to battle with the reins in his teeth and swinging his sword. And there's what he would tell his men: "Don't worry, men, they'll all be shooting at me." You know, a real character. And so what he did was he said, "I wanted to," you know, when he got through yelling at these guys, one of the lieutenants, you know, kind of timidly said, "You know, we're not part of your brigade." He was. And so Kearney went back to his tent. He cut up a red blanket into that lozenge, and he ordered his officers to wear it so he could tell good. And the men liked it too. And up here, quickly the device became known as the Kearney patch, and today is better known by its fictitious name, the Red Badge of Courage. It was the sign of elite troops in the Army of the Potomac. Okay. So I just compared the casualties here. The 124th left Goshen with 950 men, September 1862. They got to Chancellorsville without fighting a battle. All that were left were 550. Those 400 men either deserted, died of disease over the winter. Typhoid killed 40 of them, just typhoid. They were just physically unfit. The physical that the doctors gave the troops coming into service was so perfunctory that 400 or 500 women disguised themselves as men and passed it. And then they were found out and they had to go home. Okay. At Chancellorsville, they lost 40% of their men. Okay. They go to Brandy Station with 250 men, with casualties are light because they're in the woods. They go to Gettysburg with 238 men, and you can see they lost almost another 40%. So these 3 battles kind of established their reputation. It's a hell of a way to do it, And here are the officers of the Third Corps. There's Dan Sickles, New York politician. He was famous, infamous, for shooting his wife's lover in front of the White House in Lafayette Park. His wife's boyfriend was Philip Barton Keyes, Francis Scott Keyes' son or grandson, the handsomest man in Washington, D.C. Dan Sickles had, I don't know how many mistresses, but that was okay back then. But he made the mistake, but don't take this the wrong way. He married, I think she was 16 years old, the daughter of an Italian dancing master. She was an Italian girl. You know, I guess Italian girls don't put up with that. So she said, okay, he can have mistresses. I'll have a lover too. He found out about it. It was a big crying scene at their house. You know, they lived in a mansion across from Lafayette Park. He forced her to write a confession. They made up, okay, pretty much. And he said to her, why, you know, how did you two manage to get together? And she said, oh, he would stand across the street at a certain time, you know, early in the morning, and he would wave a hanky. Then we would meet somewhere else. Okay. And so Dan said, and so she's up in her room changing, and he looks out the window, and guess who's across the street? The handkerchief. Being a New York guy, he put 3 pistols in his belt, walked across and emptied one of them into the guy. Poor guy didn't have a chance. But anyway, he's put on trial for murder. Edmund Stanton was his lawyer, who later became the Secretary of War. He was found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. First successful use of that defense in American legal. So he's quite a character. At the beginning and everything was fine. You know, he shot a guy, he went on trial, and so forth. This is, you know, Victorian America too. There's certain norms, and then he broke another one. He forgave her and took her back. And so polite society said, oh no, that's just too much. And they were ostracized. Okay? He raised, at the beginning of the Civil War, on his own, and paying lots of money, he raised 4 infantry regiments, the 71st, 72nd, 73rd, and 74th, and offered them to the federal government. And they said, no, if you have to come with it, we don't want the deal. Eventually, he used his political savvy, and he got to be a commander of the Army Corps. Okay, the brigade they were in was commanded by David Birney, a pretty stern look at it. You know, he was an attorney and a businessman, not a West Point guy. None of these 3 are. This was the brigade they're in now. They're in General Ward's brigade. And then you see the 20th Indiana, the 3rd. These are all veteran regiments, very good. It was the biggest brigade in the Army of the Potomac, a lot of guys. Their commander was a New Yorker, Colonel Ward, who's buried in Monroe, I think. You know, he was, 2nd Brigade. I got some figures under there. I don't even want to know. Oh, that's how many men was it. 2182 is how many men were in this brigade, and 35.7 was the casualty rate at Gettysburg for his brigade. Okay, so let's get, here's the Army pursuing, here's the Confederates. They're heading up into Pennsylvania. Here comes the Union Army after them. Okay. And we all know the story of how, you know, Henry Howe, anybody have this one to read? I don't think so. You know, the Army marched day after day after day, and finally, now here is what the regiment looked like in terms of numbers on the eve of the Battle of Gettysburg. I highlighted the 4 original, I think there's more than that, Wygant, Benedict, Silliman, Christ, Captain Jackson and Nickel are captains who have survived so far. The other ones, you see Mapes is a lieutenant, Charles Wood is a lieutenant, their captains are gone. Lieutenant Brown, Milner Brown, is a New Yorker who showed up, he went to Albany. His family asked the governor of New York to give him a commission, they did. They sent him to the front. He met up with, they needed a captain for Company I. The soldiers in Company I resented him. Here's a civilian in uniform, is what they're thinking. You know, what do we need this guy here for? Now, this is Lee's plan for the second day at Gettysburg. His scouts tell him the Union Army is in this configuration and tails off here and is vulnerable. He decides, I'm going to get my troops over here, they'll come through the woods and they'll attack, and they will go up the Emmitsburg Road and they will roll up the flank of the Union Army just like they did at Chancellorsville. Okay? But in reality, this is what the line looked like. These scouts failed in that day. They're not on the Emmitsburg Road up here, they're down Cemetery Ridge. The key place on this battlefield, Meade and Lee first realized it immediately when they saw it, is Cemetery Hill. Because if you control Cemetery Hill, you control all of these roadways that go south, bring up supplies and so forth. And what Lee's plan was, we are going to attack, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this peach orchard because it's high ground, load it with artillery, and then we're going to capture Cemetery Hill. And in the meantime, this flank will be crushed. And the Union Army will not be defeated, but it will be eliminated. That's his plan. Okay. Here's what actually happened. The Dan Sickles, who's down here at the bottom, moved the whole third corps out, really without permission to do so. And he took it on his own. He said, I don't want to have this high ground occupied by Confederate artillery. And so he did it. And so when the Confederates came out of the woods down here, they expected there to be nobody in their way. And what happened was, here's the Third Corps. There's the Second Division. There's the Third Division. And so this is a little better. I mean, you can't go quite all the way to the bottom. That's all right. The Ward's Brigade is right here. Here's the 124th New York. Here's Smith's Battery. And just before the fighting started, the 4th Maine moved up. So here they are. This is where the Ward's troops are. When the Confederates, first of all, about an hour, they fired artillery at the troops here. They didn't expect anybody to be here. They expected everybody to be up here somewhere. And so these troops, these Confederates, instead of going this way, if they do that, their flank is exposed, and the Union soldiers will tear up their flanks with artillery and so on and so forth. Now they have to make a decision, and I don't know who made the decision. Probably General Law himself, saying, I'm not going that way, I'm going this way. Hood is the commander, of the very aggressive Confederate commander. He may have made that decision, but somebody did. He's got 4 brigades here, Anderson, Benning, Robertson, and Law, against basically 1. The Ward's Brigade is terribly outnumbered. Okay. This is what's called a triangular field, the Whiteman Field, and we'll get a better look at what's happening here. Okay. This is that ridge that they're on. This is Houck's Ridge. This is Ward's Brigade. This is the 124th New York. Smith has 4 cannons here. That's all he can fit. 2 more are behind this ridge to deal with any Confederates coming up this little draw here. Okay, so for about an hour, the troops are under artillery fire from Confederates over here. And then, just like what would happen the next day at Pickett's Charge, the soldiers look in the distance, they can see the Emmitsburg Road. They see thousands of Confederate troops step out and start the attack. And it's about a half a mile, and immediately Smith's guns open up on them and do tremendous damage. Now, because of the confusion, they're not attacking up the Emmitsburg Road again. The 3rd Arkansas and the 1st Texas try to obey those orders. They try to pivot and go this way. The other two regiments from that brigade head this way, and up behind them comes a Georgia brigade, which is a huge number of troops, and they're the ones that are going to attack. Now, Colonel Ellis had his men lie down during the artillery battle, artillery fire back and forth, so the Texans can't see them. They're coming up this hill. They've been hit by these artillery pieces, and they intend to overrun this battery. Now, when they charge, the 1st Texans, it's not a wild charge. It's, left, right, left. They're moving. They're coming up the hill at a steady pace. And when they get to just about the top, Colonel Ellis has the men stand up, close ranks, and fire a volley. That stop them. Okay, very, very quickly. They loaded and fired again, and for instance, somebody like, forget his name now, Harvey Hanford wrote in a letter, they ran like frightened sheep. Okay. Now takes place one of the historic moments of this regiment, and I showed you this picture in the beginning. Don Troiani is the painter, probably the best of the modern artists of this. Now, the men have just fired one volley. They're loading for the second volley. Colonel Ellis motions for the horses to be brought up. He mounts, that's him there. The major mounts, the adjutant mounts. The colonel, the lieutenant colonel, is down here. He's the old soldier. He's smart enough to say, if I get on a horse, they're going to shoot me. Okay? And here you have Silliman, who's a boyhood friend of himself, telling him that. You're up on a horse, you're too good a target, get off. His words, his reply is, the men must see us today. Okay? And that's what is the title of this painting, the men must see us today. Here's the colonel. There was a lieutenant from Newburgh who came up to Colonel Ellis and said essentially the same thing, get off your horse. And his words were a little less dramatic. He said something like, well, if I'm fated, if this is my fate, dismounting will not help me. Okay? Now the Texans are running. He orders a charge, and down the field they go. Okay? Shooting as they go. The Texans stop. Some of them stop and turn and fire. And when they get to the bottom, they regroup. And if we go back to this picture here, they're going to go back to the bottom of the field, and then one or two of these Georgia regiments are going to reinforce them. And they fight a pitched battle down here, and very quickly, I'd say within a few minutes of them starting down the hill, the first one to be shot off his horse is the major. Shot through the upper chest, probably in the neck, and Ellis saw it and yelled, rally men and save the major. Now the 124th was being pushed back by the enemy. That inspired them. They went forward, they grabbed the body and started bringing it up, at which point the colonel stood up in the stirrups to get a better view, and a bullet hit him right in the forehead, and down he went. Okay? And the men had to pull his body back. The third one, the others who were killed here this is Isaac Nickel from Washingtonville. He was in Company G, which was right on this, now this is right here, is where the Goshen Company is. They're right on that flank, and this, and Lieutenant Mapes is there with them, and this guy's company is right next to them. And as they go down together, Isaac Nickel got way ahead of his men, and he was shot and killed, and his body fell into the rocks, and several of his men were killed trying to get the body back. Okay. This is Milner Brown, the guy who showed up. I'm not sure where he was killed, but nobody made any attempt to get his body. He was just, they didn't even know who he was. But there was back and forth fighting here. The Texans were absolutely determined to overrun these cannons. They were thrown back several times, but what really did the damage is the Georgia troops coming around and the Alabama troops coming around. And they get the 124th New York in a crossfire. And there are Georgia veterans who write about this and say, they use the term crossfire. They were finally pushed back. The major was dead, the colonel was dead, the lieutenant colonel, there's two stories about him too. He was helping to get one of the artillery pieces to be pulled away. A projectile hit the cannon, rock hit against him. He fell, probably got a big bruise on his hip. He hit the ground. But there are other people who say that's because he was drunk. I don't know. That's, the point is, Charles Wygant is now in Company A, is now in charge of this regiment, and he leads them from the field. Okay, and there's one last reading I'd like you to listen to. Did anybody get this one? Go ahead.
It rained nearly all night. There were 20 men from the 124th detailed to go out and bury the dead. I went, but I hope it will never fall to my lot to have another opportunity, for it is a great deal more sickening than it is during the battle, for we do not have any chance to see the way they are cut to pieces. Then, but now we can examine them. We buried all of our regiment's dead and 12 or 13 of the Reds. We all began to feel sick being around in such a bad smell so long. So we were taken back, but the regiment had moved a little piece from where they were into the woods. So we took our things and went on. We stayed there during the remainder of the day and that night.
Now this is a pretty graphic description. In his diary, in his letter home to his mother, all it was, they asked for volunteers to go back to the, by this time they were out of danger, up near the center of the line, to go back down to where the battle was and bury, and that's all he writes them on. There you can see, I don't know if those are that exact position, but that's basically what it looked like 2 days later. All the equipment that the Confederates could use, shoes and so forth, was taken from the men. And finally, this is the monument to Colonel Ellis here. And the fellow who wrote this is Sergeant Stephen D. Chase, 86 New York. Go ahead.
The Red Diamond was the badge of General Birney's 1st Division of the 3rd Corps, and we want to get into that division, for it was known the most heroic in the service. When we asked for a place in it, the officers said we could have it as soon as we should merit such a place. The time was not far distant for the test. For in a few days we had a fight, and when we came out of it, the Red Diamond was given us. The 124th wanted the diamond and were told substantially the same thing that we were, that they must win it. And in this fight, they settled the question of heroism once and forever. No one ever asked the 86 or 124th New York regiments what right they had to the Red Diamond. The 124th New York was on our left near the Devil's Den, and our regiment on our right. and in the woods while they were in the open field. I looked several times to see how the regiment was doing, and happened to be looking in the direction when Colonel Ellis was shot and fell dead from his horse. This regiment has erected a beautiful monument upon the very spot where Colonel Ellis fell, and he stands in stone upon it, the very picture of a soldier.
This very moving account, it has a really important gem in it, and that is he identifies exactly where Colonel Ellis was shot. There is where that monument is. People were debating that for years until this diary showed up. I think at upstate New York College or something had it in its collection. That's, in fact, they took Ramsdell's body and put the two of them together. And then the adjutant was put in charge of getting those bodies back to New York City. And that's a harrowing tale also. The bodies of Milner Brown and the guy from Washingtonville, Isaac Nichol, they were buried on the field. And the relatives, months later, came back, had them exhumed, and were taken back home. Any questions that you have? Yes.
Hey, Chuck, this goes back up to early in the lecture. You were saying McClellan got bad information from the Pinkertons,
Yeah.
that like there were 200,000 troops from the South, but there were only 60. Was that on purpose, or did they
No.
just screw up?
No, his methods of gathering information generally were, he would interrogate Confederate prisoners. And the Confederate prisoners, like these are guys, a lot of them were sick. And, they would cross the Rappahannock River and be captured. Okay, and an officer said, here's what you tell the Yankees. So that was how they were getting that information from the Confederates on purpose. The guy that took it over was a guy named George, I think it's Strong, from Ulster County. He was a colonel of the 120th New York. It's a great regiment. His methods of gathering information were from Confederate newspapers, runaway slaves, and also from interrogation. But Hooker wanted to know, before he was going to launch his attack on Chancellorsville, he said, I want to know how many troops are against me. And Strong gave him an estimate that was within something like 2,000 men. So and that is the beginning, by the way, of military intelligence. That was how it started. The Pinkertons went on, to get famous because, they tried to kill Jesse James and didn't do it, and so forth. And they're still around. I saw a hand go up here somewhere. Yes?
The Murray that was part of the commission, is he the reason that we have a Murray Avenue in Goshen, do you know?
Yeah, he's the Murray family. I don't know if
Okay.
they named it after him specifically. Do you know that?
Yes,
Is that
that
true?
was his family, and it is named for him. He was the banker.
Yes, yeah. Was his father the banker?
Ambrose, yeah.
Yeah.
It said honorable, so
Yes.
was he a judge?
No, he's 20-some years old. He's the son.
Oh, no, I was thinking of I'm sorry. In the beginning, when they said we're gonna have these people
Oh,
help
you mean
to raise troops,
oh, yeah,
and I saw the honorable Murray,
Yes.
and then a bunch of
Yes.
esquires.
Yes, and what happened was that committee was entitled to expand itself. And pretty quick, the job became so big that the committee doubled, which, then they had other names. But what the governor wanted, and Lincoln made clear, is we want loyal members of the community, but people who are, respected by everybody and so forth. So Henry Spencer Murray, I think he was in a militia outfit, and he wanted to get out of the militia outfit early in the war and get into a fighting regiment. the militia in every state had a militia, a real militia, by the way, not like the Michigan militia, you know, that they dress up and run around the woods. The militia is an arm of the state. They usually are called out to suppress riots, fight off Indians, and so forth, in emergencies, floods, and so forth. And young Henry Spencer said to his mother, "I want to get out of this militia," and she said no. And you know, you have to go back to college. And what he did was, when his term was up, it was just about the right time, he got in and got that commission. I'm sure that somebody in the families. He was shot twice, captured twice. I don't know if they had his obituary the second time, but they did his the first time. And unfortunately, he was a prisoner. It might have been Libby Prison in Richmond, but people have done studies that if you were a captive and you were in this prison, your likelihood of dying of, I think it's tuberculosis, was 10 times, because so many of them died within a decade. He was one of them. He died
He
at
was
30.
40 years old when he died.
Pardon?
He was 40 years old when he died.
When he died? Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Very informative lecture. And thanks all for coming this morning. Remember, October 6th or 8th, I'm sorry, it's the second Saturday anyway, for Ray Kelly and the trolley. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
All right.
So I was impressed with doing all that.
Oh, you're welcome. The Murray, the banker, used to go into the National Bank of Orange County. And there they had 10-foot high pictures with
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming by this morning for our first presentation of a new series. You know, we had to stop as everything else that stopped a couple of years ago. So we're very happy to be back in business. And on behalf of the Friends of the Goshen Public Library, I'd like to say hello and thank you for being here. My name is Bill Troy. As you know probably from the publicity, we have Mr. Chuck LaRocca, who will be speaking with us about certain aspects of the Civil War. I just wanted to cover a couple of business items before we get started, just to make sure everybody's clear. In terms of the room, hopefully we'll be able to get through this without any emergencies, but if we have, the door you came in is an exit, this door here on the side is an exit, and this is an exit out to the parking lot. So if we need to evacuate unexpectedly, we can use those. Another thing I wanted to mention is that on the tables near both of these doors, the main door and this door, we have membership forms. We'd love to have more people join the Friends. We've had a large increase in the past year or so. The Friends have put on a kind of a membership drive, but we're always looking for more members. So if you'd like to fill out a form, please pick one up. Next to the forms, the ever-present jug, some people call it a tip jar, it's not really a tip jar, but anyway, if you would like to help support the Friends, please feel free to put some greenery in there. In the back of the room, you've already seen, we have coffee and some sweet treats, so please feel free to help yourself. Another thing, or perhaps the last thing I wanted to mention, the next talk in the series will be October 8th, which will be Mr. Ray Kelly. Ray was with us, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago, but this time he's going to be talking about the interurban trolley system that ran from Newburgh through Orange County, so that should be fascinating. And finally, after Chuck's presentation, we'll have a Q&A session, so please feel free to bring your questions forward at that time. Okay. On to business. Chuck is a student of American history with a special interest in the American Civil War and political science. He's a graduate of Washingtonville High School, class of '65, and Penn State University, class of '69. He taught history at O'Neill High School for 18 years before moving to Pine Bush High School. And he also taught a Civil War course at OC and a Social Studies Methods class at SUNY New Paltz. He is currently retired, or retired from teaching anyway. He's not retired, he's here with us. Chuck's wife Kathy is a former children's librarian at the library here. She's now retired. He's the author of 4 books, all pertaining to the orange blossoms, and you see a few of the books here on the table. And finally, he's a recipient of the Krista McCullough Fellowship, awarded through the U.S. Department of Education, and a Council of Basic Education Fellowship. So with that background, Chuck, please, come on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the Friends Group asking me to come speak about my favorite topic. I've done a lot of work with this part of history.
Is your microphone on?
Did we turn it off?
There it is. There it is, okay.
Okay. The collection here at the Historical Society is really fantastic. And for years, Ann, I see her sitting in the back there, Ann Roach, very, very helpful. You know, I would come in, I would ask about something, she'd go get it immediately. And in fact, just before the pandemic, I was in there copying a nice collection they have that had to do with the 156 New York. And a friend of mine is going to be using that in his research. The directors here have always been helpful to me, going back to Pauline Kehoe and Matt Gong. Hoping that'll continue when you get a new director here. I have these books up here. The blue one is a reprint of Colonel Wygant's original regimental history of the 124th. The one next to it is my book, doing basically the same story. The history, I used his book as a framework. He was an eyewitness, and he had official records in his hands because he was the last colonel of the regiment. And however, I had access to a lot more letter collections and so forth that he didn't. So I'm not trying to replace that book. All I'm doing is adding on to it. If you're interested in that, it's published by McFarland Publishing. I wouldn't suggest you buy it on eBay because I think they charge more for it on eBay. This one here, Red Badge to Gettysburg, is my first effort at a novel. There's the editor, Sal edited it for me, Sal LaBruna, and it's what happened to Private Henry Fleming at the end of the Red Badge of Courage, Stephen Crane's great novel of the Civil War. You know, they march off, they realize that they've, seen battle and done what they're supposed to do, and they're men, is basically what it comes out to. So I pick it up from that point and take Private Henry Fleming to Gettysburg, and that's where the novel ends. That is available on Amazon. However, it's also available down in the bookshop here. I think it's a Goshen mailbox. She has it there. And in Montgomery, the Book Exchange has it, and in New Paltz, I think it's called Barner's Books. And the people downtown were very instrumental because this is a picture, you can't see it, but it's Company H of the 124th New York Montgomery Company. And the Historical Society there had several copies of the original, but they needed some work. And Roxanne down there took it, dolled it up a little bit so that you could see the faces and so forth, so on and so forth. So it's really a tremendous addition. And I was determined to get that on the cover. Now I'm going to start out. Let's see if I can. Yes, this is your taxpayer dollars at work. This is Gettysburg. And it's interesting, you have this modern boom lowering a cannon into position. What they did here is they took the field pieces off. These are guns from Smith's Battery, 4th New York Independent Artillery. And the reason I'm interested in it is the 124th was formed to their right. They were there, an infantry regiment, to protect this battery. Artillery batteries can be very destructive to the enemy, but you need infantry support around them, or the enemy soldiers will get too close and shoot the artillerymen. In the back, you can see a little round top if you've been to Gettysburg. This is the ridge right in front of it. If you've seen the movie Gettysburg, let me see if the pointers, there we go. That deals with the events way in the back here. Probably a quarter of a mile in the back, Jeff Daniels and the charge of the 20th Maine. The 124th Historic Regiment was right on the ridge to the front, and they were engaged well before that. Now, this is the monument. What I'm going to do is get in touch with these people, because I want to know, did they move, when they put the guns back, did they put them back in the same position? And as I looked at this thing, here, we'll come back here. This is the monument to Colonel Ellis of the 124th New York. And as you can see, these artillery pieces are well behind them. Now, there's a big controversy, because no one knows exactly where these guns were placed. This is the crest here. When they put the monument in and put the guns in this position, the chief of artillery for the Army of the Potomac was there, and he turned to Captain Smith and said, "Had you placed your guns here, I would have court-martialed you." Okay? Now, so where? And he said to him, "Get a bucket of paint and paint a rock where the right flank of your guns are." There's 4 of them up there, which he didn't do. So historians are still going round and round about this. But this Gettysburg and places like this, they're not stagnant. There's constant research. The first thing that caught my eye is the distance. I think maybe the regiment, which is usually thought of as being up here, may have been back in the woods, and you're going to see a map showing that as we go along. So let's go back up to the top. By the way, Bill, I came in today and had him download another. I edited it, and I was afraid he was going to throw me out the door, because he had everything set up. Thank you for doing that. Somebody has this. Go ahead.
Okay. The rebels opened a fire of shell, and an artillery duel was kept up for an hour or more. At length, the enemy appeared in a heavy column of battalions advancing upon us from the opposite woods. As we held the positions by a single line of battle unsupported, the enemy's superiority in numbers seemed overwhelming. As they approached, they deployed in 4 distinct lines of battle and came resolutely on under a rapid fire from our batteries. All seemed lost, but in the steady lines of the 3rd Corps, not a man flinched.
I think this picture was taken when it may have been taken in Goshen. This is Lieutenant, I'm going to get used to this. This is Lieutenant Travis, who is a supply commissary. They have to bring the hardtack and salt pork up, and ammunition and so forth. This is Captain Silliman from Cornwall, the captain of Company C. And this is Henry Ramsdell from Newburgh. He's an adjutant, that's the paper shuffler at headquarters. And he's from a very wealthy family. In fact, all of these officers in the regiment were from prominent families in the county. And I'll tell you how that got to be the case. Who has this one?
Oh, I do.
So I'll tell you who this guy is first. This is a Sergeant Harvey Hanford, Company B. This is a guy from Goshen. It's the Goshen Company. And he was the sergeant in the rear of the company on the extreme left. And for a good period of time, on the 2nd of July, 1863, he was the farthest man on the left flank of the entire Army of the Potomac. Now, eventually, another regiment pulled in, and he was very proud of that. Go ahead.
Then followed the usual cannonading until the infantry of the Confederates got so close as to pick off all our gunners. Then shone out the bravery of Captain Smith. When he had not enough men left to man the guns, he would come to us and ask and beg of us to help him fire them. Then he would run back to the guns, do what he could, and then back to us. And with tears in his eyes would say, "For God's sake, men, don't let them take my guns away from me."
Okay, now,
And we're hearing that today, right?
a number of men on that side of the regiment, that end of the regiment, were very, after the war, were very, gave a lot of credit to Captain Smith. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get to the actual position. In fact, I think we have a, okay, who has this one? Go ahead.
The wounded Rebs are saddled off on us as usual. I had a talk with some wounded, a colonel, major, and captain, and many privates. They are tired of the war, but say it will never be settled by fighting. I can't see it. They are a vicious, ignorant people, and God will never prosper there. The Rebs took shoes, canteens, and haversacks off our dead soldiers. I firmly believe this Union will be reconstructed again. Tell my good friends that I think of them often, which inspires me to go forward in the performance of duty and with my sword hew out my way to distinction. Tell them my voice is still for the war until the stars and stripes float again over every inch of American soil. General Ward told us we had earned the red patch and shall have it.
This is a young man from Florida, New York, who came to Goshen with a number of men. For what reason, I don't know. The Company D in Warwick may have been full. Maybe it was a political problem or something. But he brought them in, and I had access to about 40 of his letters. And he really is a character. And these expressions that he's using come throughout the letters. I mean, he's just not talking about using his sword to hew his way to distinctions. He's going to do it. He, at one point, one of the soldiers got a little flippant with him, and so he just, excuse me, beat the hell out of him. And he was a first lieutenant. He was a second lieutenant who had aspirations of being the first lieutenant, and then the captain. And he made his way. You'll see the letter I'm going to show you. And his letters are kind of gritty too. He's writing to his brother. So I saw a lot of that in these letters. If you're writing home to mom or your sister, you kind of gloss over. But if you're writing to a brother or another male, you tell it like it is. The patch he's talking about is the red diamond patch. I'll talk about that more too. But it was extremely important to the 124th New York and to the 86th New York. They were like brother regiments. It's called also the Carney Patch. It's also called the Red Badge of Courage. And that's where I think Stephen Crane got the idea for his novel. Okay.
Battlefield, July 5th, 1863. We had to yield at last, which we did slowly and in good order, taking nearly all the wounded with us. We had not fallen back more than 20 or 30 rods when the 2nd Corps and part of the 5th came up to our assistance and speedily retook the ground we had lost and quite a number of prisoners. When we got where we could rest for the night, Company E had only 3 men with colors, the others having gone to the rear with the wounded. George Godfrey, Adam Miller, and myself were the 3, and we felt as though we were alone in the world, for we did not know what had become of the rest. But towards noon the next day, the men began to come in. But I am sorry to say that we, Wood, and Hurst are among the missing, but we know they are unhurt.
Okay, this is a letter on the battlefield, 2 days after the charge. And this is Henry Howell, Company B. They were from Howell's Depot. he and his brother William served in Company E. And again, I had a lot of his letters to read. He was wounded at the Battle of Spotsylvania. When he wrote home, he had to tell his mother that the brother was killed, and he was wounded, but he said, not a very bad wound. That wound kept him in the hospital for a year, and he never returned to service. Now, I'll give you a little background. Those are the primary sources that I thought, this is what the soldiers saw. This is what they were thinking of when they wrote home. 1862 dawned, and the Union was very, very optimistic. They closed the recruiting offices in a lot of cases. There were anti-war activists and newspaper editors that had been arrested and were in Fortress Monroe in Virginia, Union prison. They were let out because they figured the war was almost over. But much to their surprise, that didn't work out that way. General McClellan, here he is, a Union commander of all the armies. This is General Johnston. These are the two that are going to oppose each other. This guy got wounded, and that's when Robert E. Lee took over. And it's in this series of battles. McClellan did not want to attack the Confederacy overland. They were heading for Richmond. There were Union troops in the Shenandoah Valley, 3 different armies. There was only one Confederate army there, but that Confederate army was commanded by Stonewall Jackson. It was bigger than any of the 3 which were separated, but if the 3 had gotten together and coordinated their attack, Stonewall Jackson would have been history right there. But they didn't do that. So the battles in the Shenandoah Valley in April, May, and so forth, the Union soldiers were pretty much pushed out of here. McClellan put his men on boats, sent them down, landed them at Fortress Monroe. The Union was in control of this place, and sent them up this peninsula at a very, very, very slow pace. But the Confederates realized he may be slow, but eventually he's going to get here. And so they launched what became known as the 7-day battles of 7-day battles. There were 7 battles here. McClellan, it is said, won every one of them except one, and retreated after each battle because his intelligence was telling him, the Pinkerton agents, by the way, were telling him, you are outnumbered. Robert E. Lee has 200,000 men when he had about 60,000 men. So McClellan was cautious and had the slows. President Lincoln said he had the slows. But they retreated back down, got off the peninsula, and went back. And by this point in time, the president is pulling his hair out. And he wanted to call for more troops. But he didn't want it to seem like, all this stuff was going bad, and, he didn't want it to be, the public to misjudge that it was a crisis, but it kind of was. So what he did was he asked these loyal governors, send me a letter asking me to call for more troops, and I'll be responding to you. Abraham Lincoln is often thought of like a backwoods Socrates, but he was a very crafty politician all the time. So here's the letter that he's now sending back to the governors. I don't think anybody has this one. Gentlemen, fully concurring in the wisdom of the views expressed to me in so patriotic a manner by you, we're going to call for 300,000, because you're asking me to do this, 300,000 3-year volunteers, okay, a mighty army of volunteers to finally put an end to this rebellion. Okay, may I suggest that they be infantry, foot soldiers. We don't need any more artillery. Union artillery is very good, far superior in many cases to Confederate artillery. We don't need any more cavalry. The cavalry at this point did not have a very good reputation. They were starting to get better, and over this summer of '63 became a lot better. And so he kicked this now down to the governors. New York's governor was Edwin Morgan. His job was to appoint a military committee. The state was divided up into military districts. Orange and Sullivan was the 9th military district. And he was to appoint a committee of civilians. These guys are not military men. Some of them may have, but these are the prominent citizens, mostly you can see of central and western Orange County. Their job is to raise the regiment. By the way, the quota for New York in this is 59,000 and change men. So when they divide it up into these committees, each division had a number. You'll see that here in a minute. So the governor made the committee. The committee's job is also to fundraise for bounties and so on and so forth for the troops, so they can raise money. But most importantly, they are there to name a colonel of the regiment. And this is the guy they chose. This is Augustus Van Horn Ellis. He's not a native of Orange County. Came from New York City. And here's the statement that appeared in the newspaper, appointing him as the colonel of the regiment and giving him an order to get this underway. Immediately under it in the newspaper is an ad put in by Ellis, and he says, in accordance with the order, I am ready to receive proposals from persons desirous of organizing companies or parts thereof. You can make application to me. Now, so many times I've heard that these regiments elected their officers. The companies did. Every company has 3 officers. And yet I find no evidence of that with the 124th New York. I think there was a lot of horse trading going on about who gets what, and I'll show you what that's dependent upon. But this tells me, he says, they can make application to him, not to the committee, but to him. He's going to keep an eye on, and that's his, by the way, his personality. You know, he's a very strong person, has a quick temper, very profane. He drew his sword one time and threatened to cut somebody's head off, a sergeant, because the sergeant was in the wrong position, you know, when they were learning to line up. So I think Ellis really took a hands-on approach to this, okay? And then here is he's talking about what kind of men he wants. A regiment of men is one thing. A regiment of fighting men is another thing. The country needs, and I want the latter. He's put the message out, okay? The military district has to raise 1,800 men, Orange County 1,200, and Sullivan County 600. Okay, this is the quota for each town. Goshen here, Goshen has to raise 57 men. That's the quota. Now this is very important because everybody knew by this time in the war, sooner or later there's going to be a draft. Okay, if you meet your quota or go over it, less men from your town are going to be drafted. And so the push was, you know, do this now, sign up before you have to go. And you can see the places here like Newburgh, 285 men and so forth. Now, also in the paper right after that is another advertisement, Men of Orange County, you have already done more, and do more. We know you've done nobly. And what he's talking about is, right at the start of the war, the local congressman at that time was a Democrat named Charles Van Wyck. And he was concerned because Orange County men were going off to Albany and New York City to join regiments, and Orange County would not get any credit for that. So he asked for and was given permission to raise what became the 56th New York. 5 companies from Sullivan, 5 companies came from Newburgh. This regiment's patch, their insignia, was an X for 10. It commemorated Caesar's 10th Legion, and it was called the 10th Legion. And also because it was Charles Van Wyck's constituency. Now, the congressman, for all his patriotism, found out very quickly that he knew nothing about how are you going to train these guys, how are you going to feed them, how are you going to discipline them. And so the man he hired to do that was Augustus Van Horn Ellis. This is a year before Ellis was named colonel of the 124th. He said to, Ellis was a captain in the 71st Militia. He'd been at the Battle of Bull Run, and so he had the requisite military skill, everybody thought, and he did, and he shaped up those men very, very quickly. Now, a legion, this is what this came to be, is infantry, artillery, and cavalry. It's different arms all working together. So the congressman's regiment was 1,400 men instead of the usual 1,000 men. He had 10 companies of infantrymen, 2 companies of sharpshooters, and a couple squadrons of cavalry, and 2 batteries. Now, when he got all those guys, well, what first happened was the regiment was so well, they drilled, they knew what they were doing because of Ellis. The congressman had said to Ellis, I'll make you the lieutenant colonel, you train these guys. I'll have a rank of colonel, but when it comes time to march off to war, I'll step back and you'll be the colonel, okay? Well, when that day came, he didn't do it. He said to Ellis, you know, you have to stay as a lieutenant colonel. Ellis went berserk. I'm surprised he didn't beat him up or shoot him, because he really had a temper, and he just cut his everything with this. And even after the war, there was no love lost between the 56th New York vets and the 124th New York vets. Now, here are the 3 field officers of the 124th New York. Here's Ellis in the middle. Columbia University, I always read that he attended. Only recently are they saying he graduated. So he may or may not have. New York City attorney, about a year ago I read that, and I'm not sure quite, I know he was a businessman. He went to, I do know that he didn't want to sit in an office, and he and a younger brother, there were 5 brothers, went to California probably in the early 1850s, not to dig gold, but as a businessman. He loaded a ship full of goods, and he thought, he and his brothers, and the ship went to California, and while there, he was a businessman. They bought land in what is now Portland, Oregon, and opened up a lumber business. The lumber, of course, was brought down to San Francisco, which caught on fire about every other week. And and they were doing pretty well. I don't know, haven't found out yet why he left, but he did, and he got a job sailing for Vanderbilt. And as in the Caribbean, he had the route from going from New Orleans to Havana to Honduras to New Orleans and so forth. I think as war clouds gathered, he came home to New York City. He married a widow in Vale's Gate. I think that was her plan. She had a son by her first marriage, and he adopted the boy, and his name was changed. I think Miller was the last name from her husband. And that makes it very difficult when you start researching these people, because you see the name Augustus Van Horn Ellis, and for the longest time, I'm trying to think, who is this guy? I thought Ellis was dead by now. Well, that was the son he adopted. And there he fought at Bull Run up with the 71st Militia. The second in command was Francis Marco Cummins, a Goshen native. He fought in the Mexican War, and he was, when the war broke out, the Civil War broke out, he was in Muscatine, Iowa, on a farm, and I'm assuming that was something that he got for serving in the Mexican War. The veterans were given land out on the frontier. He joined Iowa regiments first. He fought at Wilson's Creek, Doug Springs, and Shiloh, a huge battle, bloody battle, at which he was drunk. He was arrested, sent to the rear. He sobered up. He came back in, picked up a rifle, and kind of redeemed himself. I think everybody knew that story, but the soldiers teased him. You know, they liked him. He was a very, like a fatherly figure, where Ellis was, you know, don't ever cross him. This guy was a little bit easier on the soldiers. They nicknamed him Old Shiloh, to kind of remind him, we know the story, but we don't care. Yeah. The third was the major, Cromwell, RPI graduate, a Quaker, an abolitionist. He served in the 7th New York Cavalry, which didn't have any horses, so they never went to battle. He got sick and came home, and when the regiment was being formed, he made himself available, and he had a pretty good reputation. He came from a very prominent family. By the way, Ellis didn't even know who Cummins was, and he wanted to name a militia guy from Albany as the lieutenant colonel. I think that committee stepped in, and the people of Goshen stepped in and said, no, we don't want some guy from New York City or Albany ordering our men around. This guy, you know, he's a native of Goshen, we want him. I think that committee stepped up and made sure he got in. Now, they set up a camp, and up on here, there's a couple of things that are interesting. These are new from the newspaper. The town of Chester has raised $1,000 to give each of the 36 men an extra bounty of $25. Now, the federal government gave a bounty, I think was $25. The state was $50. The town of Montgomery gave the first 60 volunteers in Company H $50. So private could leave, you know, could sign up and get something over $100 to give to whoever is remaining at home, wife or mother or something like that. Very few of them, I'm sure, took the money with them. And also, what I see here is these guys are recruiting. Now, Colonel Ellis, you know, picked the people he wanted to do the recruiting, and here you see a guy named Charles Wood. He's right here. He's calling himself a captain. He's raised 25 men, and then took them to Captain Wygant of Newburgh to join up with them. Well, you can't have two captains. Wygant became the captain, and this Charles Wood became a lieutenant. And I think that's what happened. These companies kind of amalgamate. Well, how many guys did you bring? Well, I've got this many guys, and I think that's how these things were formed. Here you see they've set up a kitchen. This is where the soldiers will eat here in Goshen, right over where the county building is, right up to the school building. They occupied all that land. They built accommodations for 1,000 soldiers. They weren't tents, these were wooden barracks. They were there the better part of August into September 6th or 7th, I think. And while the people of Goshen were very patriotic, they were happy to see the soldiers leave town and everything be taken down, because it was becoming, you know, quite a bit of a problem. And what caught my eye here is a finer body of men and more orderly and well-behaved could not be got together. I'd say that's a big exaggeration, because the soldiers were constantly going into town after dark, and there was really no way to prevent it, because, you know, the soldiers were issued. I know this building is air conditioning is pretty good, so they had a jacket just like this, trousers, leather booties, a hat, but no leather gear and no musket. So the guards were at a rake, you know, and these guys would go out and have a good time in town and come back. So Colonel Ellis was just itching to put an end to that. This is what a Civil War regiment looked like. It was composed of 10 companies, and here they are up on the top. There's 8 here. This particular drawing has, these guys are skirmishers, but they would be up here, okay? The deal is, the first captain that gets his men to Goshen and has them sign the roster gets to be the senior captain, and his company, Company A, will be here on the right flank. That's a post of honor. Okay, that was Charles Wygant from Newburgh. He did it. Now he's the senior captain. The next one gets to be on the left flank. That was Murray. That's captain. That's Company B from Goshen. I don't know what took him so long. He's right here. And the third one would be in the center, and that would be the color company with the color guard, and that was Sullivan, and so forth. Now, it's very important because you have a major, a lieutenant colonel, and a colonel. If one of them gets sick and have to leave the service, they get wounded and can't come back, or he dies, killed in battle or by disease, the first one to move up is going to be the senior. Am I making that noise?
I think.
Yeah.
Let me just try something.
I'll keep my hand away from that. And so, let me just drop that, of course, yeah. Oh, that's in here. I think it's just as it's rubbing against the wall. Here. No, there's no outside power. I'll just try not to. Sorry. So there's 10 companies, and this is what the company looks like. We have the company, the captain will stand here, first sergeant behind him. The men are in two ranks. Behind them will be the 2 lieutenants and 4 more sergeants. They're all basically the same. So if we go over now, here is the makeup of Company B in Goshen. Okay, this is Captain Murray. Now he got to be the captain by bringing 66 men. Now what was Goshen's? What, a 57 or something like that? Yeah, so these guys are doing a pretty good job. This man is from Newburgh. He becomes the first lieutenant. His name is Wygant. He brought 7 or 8 men. I think because there's so many Wygants and Wyants over at that end of the county, there was no place for him, but they sent him here. And here is William Mates, who brought 21 men, basically from Warwick and Florida. And again, I think that company was probably filled, and he brought them. And these are going to be the 3 officers. Almost immediately now, this man didn't last too long. He resigned. He asked the officer can resign anytime he wants. Resign his commission. He was successful at what he did before the military, and he was successful after. He was a banker, and he went out after he left the army. He went west. He became the president of some big bank. He just didn't have, I guess, the stamina more than anything else. And waiting in the wings is Second Lieutenant Mates, and you'll see from one of the letters here, as soon as this guy leaves, he's going to move up. Now, I guess the moral of the story is be careful what you wish for, because at the Battle of Chancellorsville, the captain was severely wounded, left for dead on the field, captured by the enemy, and held for weeks. You know, they had his obituary in the newspaper, Murray. Okay? And in the meantime, now the lieutenant is in command of the entire company, which is what basically he wanted in the end. He's got to do the work all himself. And now he complained in his letters about it. First of all, they haven't given me any more rank, which would mean a raise in pay, and I don't have anybody to help me. but he made a pretty good go of it. Now, in Wygant's history, this is interesting. In the ranks of this company were some of the very best and a few of the poorest soldiers in the regiment. Wygant was not, he was very critical of if you didn't do the job, it showed up in his history. There was a flag ceremony here, just like in every other of these regiments that were raised at the time. The Daughters of Orange raised, I think it was $130, and from Tiffany, New York City, they soldiers, the ladies, get back there, bought a flag like this. On it, it said American Guard, which was the first nickname of the regiment, made of silk, the stars painted on, and it was a very moving presentation here in Goshen, 27th or 28th of August, I believe. Colonel Ellis said, if you never again see these colors, if they're lost in battle, you will never again see those who bear them from you. So he's saying, we'll die before these flags are taken. This thing was so shot up that in March of '64, the Daughters of Orange sent another one. And look at the battle damage on this one. This is from March until the end of the war, only 1 year, and this is all that's left of it. It was the same as the first one, except it said orange blossoms, and it had a little painting of orange blossom here. The color bearer was chosen for his bravery, his military bearing and so forth. It's a dangerous job, no question about it. And here's a soldier commenting on camp. We have plenty of fun here in camp. I didn't eat nothing, but I can eat as much as any of them now. We have all got our uniforms, and we don't have guns. We are to have mini rifles, which would be a modern firearm. Here it is here. It's a Springfield rifle. It's very accurate. And here Colonel Ellis is writing to Albany saying, I want Springfield rifles for my regiment. Who can put me in touch with it? How, somebody controls who gets what. They have 300,000 soldiers being recruited all at once, 59,000 in New York. There just were not enough weapons to go around. And so here's what the gun shoots. This is the mini ball. Little dimple in the bottom. This, when the gun is fired, this flares off, catches into the rifling, the ball spins. It's called a ball, even though it's elongated, and it's very, very accurate, 200, 300 yards, as accurate as you are, up to those distances. This is what they wanted. This is what they got. This is a European import. I think they call it a Vincennes rifle. The Europeans were absolutely delighted to empty all the armories and sell us their junk, and they did. This thing is, I own 2 of these. You've heard the expression going off at half cock. Well, they have a hammer. All these guns, they're loaded down to the front, okay? The deal is, you load it, and then you pull the hammer back, one click, you hear a click, and there's a little vent there. They call it a nipple, that's what it looks like. And then you take a percussion cap, and you squeeze it on there, all right? That's the safety. You can pull the trigger, and the hammer won't move, in theory, okay? Then when it's time to shoot, you pull it back down. Full cock, pull the trigger, okay? Now, Captain Benedict, Company D from Warwick, said these weapons in the hands of his troops, 40 of them out of about 90 went off when you pulled at half cock. So very dangerous. So I was going to bring it, but I left it home. It's just a pain in the neck anyway. I picked one of them up the other day, and I pulled it back. I've never fired these and never will. And there is no half cock. You have to pull it all the way back, and it clicks. And then you put the percussion cap on, and you can't there's no safety. So I put that one down, I picked the other one up. There's a half cock, go back to half cock, but there's not enough room to get the cap on. You have to squeeze it on, it can't be